Welcome to This Explainer. You know, the most lucrative, fast-moving space race happening right now isn't looking out into the void. It's actually looking right back down at Earth. Today, we're exploring a massive shift in global technology. We're looking at how India is rapidly transforming into the world's premier provider of geospatial intelligence. We are talking about a huge surge in deep tech, rockets, and orbital data that is completely redefining how businesses operate on the ground.
Okay, let's dive into this. We're going to cover the sheer hunger for space data, how we're shifting from basic imagery to real-time decision intelligence, and then we'll meet India's space vanguard. After that, we'll look at the actual business of orbit and why this is poised to be the next great global export.
All right, part one, the hunger for space data. Who exactly is buying this view from above?
So, seriously, who is actually buying all this satellite data? I mean, it takes millions of dollars just to launch a satellite. Who is paying the massive subscription fees to keep this whole industry afloat? Well, spoiler alert, it's not just governments drawing borders or making basic maps anymore.
The actual buyers are surprisingly grounded in our everyday necessities. It's wild how wide this goes. We're talking about agriculture, where agri-tech companies use satellites to detect crop stress, predict yields, and even underwrite farm insurance. Then you've got the energy sector, oil and gas companies constantly monitoring thousands of miles of pipelines. For environmental compliance, satellites are doing the heavy lifting, detecting methane leaks and monitoring forests. And in mining, companies are literally tracking large-scale infrastructure changes day by day.
Owais Ahmed, the founder and CEO of Pixxel, hit the nail on the head here. He notes that a huge chunk of demand is pouring in from North America, Europe, and the Middle East because organizations want advanced Earth observation. Traditional static satellite imagery, it just isn't cutting it for them anymore. Global enterprise customers like Rio Tinto in mining or data farming in agri-tech, they don't want a blurry, outdated picture of the ground. They need something vastly more advanced to protect their assets and manage their supply chains.
Which brings us to part two, imagery to decision intelligence. We are moving from static maps to live feeds. And this brilliantly illustrates the core paradigm shift driving the whole industry. The old way, passive Earth observation, is kind of like looking at a printed, static map. It's simple, it updates infrequently, and honestly, by the time you see it, the info might be weeks old. But the new way, decision intelligence gives customers near real-time insights that actively drive risk assessment and planning. It's literally the difference between pulling out a paper map and checking a live traffic feed for the planet's resources.
To make that live feed a reality, companies are using tech like hyperspectral imaging. Let's unpack how that actually works. Instead of just snapping a normal photo, hyperspectral sensors capture a massive continuous spectrum of light. This actually reveals the chemical and physical makeup of whatever they're looking at. And here's the absolute game changer. As these satellites revisit the same location more frequently, this data becomes exponentially more valuable because customers can continuously track tiny day-by-day changes on the ground.
Okay, moving on to part three. Let's meet India's space vanguard, the startups actually building this infrastructure.
So, who's building this global live feed? Well, India's ecosystem covers the entire hardware stack. You've got Pixxel focusing on that hyperspectral imaging, planning a constellation of over 25 satellites for near real-time tracking. Then there's GalaxEye, building multi-sensor opto-SAR systems, aiming for 15 to 20 satellites. You have Agnikul Cosmos. Think of them as the orbital delivery service, building the launch vehicles for these dedicated global constellations. And you even have Red Balloon Aerospace, who are finding a completely different way to the sky using near-space platforms up in the stratosphere.
Now, what's really interesting about this is how these startups are solving incredibly tough physical problems. Take GalaxEye's mission Drishti and their opto-SAR technology. You know, Earth is covered in clouds a lot of the time, which basically renders traditional optical cameras useless. Opto-SAR elegantly solves this by combining those optical cameras with synthetic aperture radar, or SAR, into a single multi-sensor system. This gives them all-weather vision that can literally see right through the clouds.
And the ultimate goal of having 15 to 20 of these all-weather satellites up in orbit? A global revisit time of just 3 to 4 hours. Just imagine having high-resolution all-weather data of any point on Earth updated every few hours. That is the very definition of persistent intelligence rather than just passive observation.
But hey, it's not all happening in orbit. Ironically, some of the most cutting-edge observation tech is a balloon. Red Balloon Aerospace is taking a totally different route, operating right at the edge of space. They're building recoverable, high-altitude platforms by launching Vista super-pressure balloons 20 to 50 kilometers up into the stratosphere. And get this, their first launch is already scheduled for Q2 of 2026.
All right, part 4, the business of orbit. Let's talk about funding this deep tech boom.
Of course, absolutely none of this hardware gets off the ground without serious capital. And the momentum here is just staggering. Think about it. It was only in 2020 that India officially opened its space sector to private players. In just a handful of years, we've gone from essentially zero private space industry to a massive funding surge in 2025. And we're seeing real, tangible launch schedules locked in for 2026, with complete constellation deployments targeted by the end of the decade. The speed of execution is just phenomenal.
To put a hard number on that momentum, $120 to $150 million. That's the funding attracted by India's private space tech ecosystem in 2025 alone. It's actually incredible. We aren't just talking about standard government grants anymore. This is aggressive private investor appetite driven by sheer commercialization and massive international demand.
And individual companies are seeing huge validations. Agnikul Cosmos, the launch vehicle maker we touched on earlier, recently raised $17 million. That single raise pushed their valuation past the $500 million mark. The market clearly sees the pressing need for dedicated launch services to get all these new constellations into orbit.
So the crucial point is that the rules of space funding have genuinely matured. Investors aren't just writing checks for cool ideas or flashy pitch decks anymore. They want flight heritage. They want proof you can actually fly. They need to know you have the manufacturing capabilities to build at scale, real commercial contracts lined up, and the sheer ability to deploy. They are funding-proven execution, plain and simple.
Which brings us to our final section, Part 5, the next great export, engineering for the world from India.
Zooming out to look at the global market, while commercial demand from agriculture and mining is surging incredibly fast, GalaxEye's CEO Suyash Singh rightfully points out that defense and intelligence still make up the largest share of satellite data users globally. The total addressable market across both private enterprise and global defense, it's absolutely massive.
And Indian startups are perfectly positioned to capture this market due to a unique trifecta. Founders point out that India has a deep pool of world-class engineering talent. Combine that with a significantly lower cost of execution compared to Western counterparts, and match it with a rising international demand for constant Earth observation. Together, these factors could genuinely make space data one of India's biggest deep tech export opportunities of the next decade.
Srinath Ravichandran, the co-founder and CEO of Agnikul Cosmos, captured the ethos of this movement perfectly. He said, "Space is an international market. We are always building for the world from India. This isn't just about building local tech for local problems. This is about critical, global infrastructure being engineered, launched, and managed from India for the entire planet."
We've seen how quickly we've moved from static maps to live hyperspectral decision intelligence. We've seen the cutting-edge startups, the massive influx of funding, and the undeniable global demand. So I'll leave you with this final thought to ponder. When we look for the next massive technological shift that will run the global economy, should we be looking at Silicon Valley? Or should we be looking up at orbit engineered in India? Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep learning, keep looking up, and I'll catch you next time.